It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is my good friend Alex Early, and we're going to be talking about his brand new book, Among the Pots and Pans: Connect with God, Love Your Neighbor, and Nourish Your Community Through the Art of Cooking. Alex, it has been way too long, my friend. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be back. Good to see you.
And I was thinking, man, it has to have been like 7, 8 years since we last
Mhm.
talked. So if I asked you the origin story question last time, who knows? But we've had so many new people join and subscribe that we're going to go there again. So give us a little bit of the Alex early origin story. I've
Sure.
been fascinated just being your friend for the last 10 years, but for somebody that are meeting you for the first time, give us a little context for you.
Okay. Yeah. I was born and raised in Woodstock, Georgia, a small farm town. I grew up in the church. I became a Christian around the age of 16 and knew right away God was calling me into the ministry, but I didn't know what that would look like for a long time. And so went to college and seminary and got married and served different churches at various capacities. And through that time, I developed a deep love for the academy. And so I kind of thought maybe I'm going to be a theology professor. So I kept going to school, which took us over to London. And as I was studying academic theology and preparing for a life in the academy, I fell in love with the church in a way that I hadn't completely fallen in love with the church. You know what I mean? And really, since God calling me into church planting and the pastoral world, and that was when I was about 28 years old. So I'm 44 now, and so I planted a church in Georgia, and then about 3 years after that, moved out to Seattle, and have basically been around the Seattle area for a good while now. So, anyway, so I've been involved in church planting, helped plant Redemption Church, the church that I lead here in Seattle now, and so I've been doing that for that's my life. That's my whole life story. I also have kids, write some books. I've also had a lot of fun. So,
Well, that's a great origin story. You kept it within kind of the elevator pitch framework, though. So perfect
great,
answer, man.
great.
Okay, and I first met you. Goodness, I think we worked on a book at Bethany House. It was
Mhm.
Red. I forget the title off the top of my head,
Yeah,
but I think that
reckless love of God.
Reckless Love of God, still one of my favorite projects I worked on
Yep.
at Bethany House. But I don't remember like back. Like I know I met you for breakfast one time when I was in Seattle, and I remember
Mhm.
you were like really into eating good food, but I don't know if you were as much into cooking back then. Tell us like how,
Yeah.
because like you're next level hardcore now. How'd you get into cooking? How did that like grow in your life?
Yeah, through my friend John Snell. He was a dude that joined our church that we had planted in Georgia 100 years ago, and he helped me see my need to work creatively with my hands kind of right out of the gate as I became a pastor. Like, work in the parish, work in the church is never done, whether it's people or sermons or myself, especially. So I needed to do something creative with my hands because all of my work involves words, whether speaking words, writing words, listening to words. It's all about words. And I need to do something with my hands. I'm not just a thinking head, and a talking face. So um, I started thinking about, well, what am I going to do with my hands, And well, maybe I could play music, but that would, if okay, I like playing music or I like painting, but that doesn't really involve my friends and family so much. And so, well, John might be suggesting the right thing. He was super into cooking and said, "Come start cooking with me, man." And started showing me a way around the kitchen. And I found myself really enjoying creating something with my hands because I'm not very handy. Like I can't swing a hammer. I'm just useless in so many of those ways. And so uh, that's what kind of scratched that itch. And as I found myself working in the kitchen, that's where everybody ends up hanging out anyway. And whether it's your family or friends or whatever. And so started seeing, oh, this is really cool. This involves everybody else. Everybody gets a meal at the end of, you know, when you're done cooking. And then of course I started as a follower of Jesus, I started noticing, oh, uh, I'm experiencing him here in this place in my kitchen, uh, in a way that I didn't expect, like I would say at the communion table. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Well, and at one point, we talked about this briefly before the interview. You end up doing some sort of a food blog. Your wife is doing some of the photography for that. Talk to us about the story of how you go from that to a signed book contract. Just and again, for me, I still remember when you're like, "Hey, I signed a contract. I'm so excited," and I was like, okay, I'm not sure how you pull this one off because I've helped architect so many book projects in the last 10 years, but I'm like, never a cookbook with good theological teaching. I don't know how to bring that together. So, how do we go from food blog to Harvest House? Like, dude, this is an epic idea.
Yeah, well, yeah, that man. So the reason why I think it's my favorite thing I've ever worked on is because it involves so many people, especially my wife. Um, and so let's see. I remember back on Instagram when people started taking pictures of their food and saying, "This is what I'm having for lunch today," and I used to laugh at that stuff like crazy, going, "That's so silly. Like, who cares?" And I still, in some regards, like, who cares? But at the same time, it also kind of kept piquing my interest. And then as I was getting into cooking, I thought, well, why don't I just start showing my friends what I'm making? And interest generated kind of like that. So I started a food blog. It wasn't anything big or special or like massive, but it was enough that because I'm a pastor and a theology prof, and my wife made what I was preparing at home aesthetically look beautiful, that kind of caught the attention of others out in the publishing world. And so uh, Andrew Wogomuth, my agent, he's known forever that I really wanted to write somehow integrating the worlds of theology and food. And in a discussion with our friend Kyle Hatfield over at Harvest House, Kyle took the idea, saw what I had posted online, and said, "Man, I got a better idea. Don't do just a trade book. Let's do a full cookbook. Like your wife should shoot the whole thing. I'm talking like a hardback, like an amazing colorful, like 50 recipes." I'm like, "What?" He said, "Let's just try. Let me see. I don't know what my team's gonna say, but I think you could do something like seriously awesome like this." I'm like, okay, like he believed in me more than I did. And so he said, just send me a writing sample, send us a few shoots that Jana's working on lately. And he rolled into the team and rolled it out. And he got back to me that day and was like, everybody was really excited about this idea. And so it kind of just evolved through people noticing Jana's photography and my writing and like my history with being a pastor and a Bible prof. Like it kind of all fell into place like that. But it was Kyle's kind of creative genius that saw that and said, this could actually be a real thing, man. So,
Well, on the one hand, we'll be thankful for an agent with a long memory. That's always helpful. And also, I mean, and this is for any authors who've worked with a publisher, you need an advocate inside the house to pitch your idea, to really come to the table and be like, "This is amazing," and sell the rest of the team on it. And clearly, you had somebody who, as you said, had a much bigger vision than what you would have thought this could have
oh,
been.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm just so amazed with how it turned out. Like I was looking through it this morning to get ready for the interview, and just and I want to kind of get to the layout and format in a minute, but just the interspersing of teaching with recipes, and I was like, this is amazing. Like I could have never architected something like this either. I was like, geez, this is so. On the one
Yeah.
hand, I feel like you guys are breaking new ground in our space. But the one thing that came to mind as you were sharing a minute ago is like I think of like children's books in the sense like where the kids get read too often, but the audience that's buying it often impacted as much are the parents. And so what I love about this is it's kind of subtle. It's an amazing cookbook that if you just buy this to cook the recipes, it's fantastic. But you're also going to if you'll take the time, get exposed to some great teaching. And so would have never thought to marry those two together, but
Yeah,
yeah.
here we
So
go.
so I guess that brings me to my next question. Like, as they said, "Hey, Alex, we're going to do a contract. We're going to do this." Like, how did you figure out like what kind of a journey you wanted to take us on? Because again, it's a cookbook where you're not probably going to read it from cover to cover. So,
Right.
how did you get a vision for that in terms of the teaching and the recipes and sort of the arc of the journey you're taking us on? How did that come together?
Yeah. Well, like the title itself, it says, yeah, it's called Among the Pots and Pans. And that's a quote from St. Teresa of Avila, who's taught her students, the God's not just found at the communion table. He walks among the pots and pans. He's with us in our average, ordinary, mundane tasks. And so it's kind of leans on that theology of like Brother Lawrence and practice of the presence of God, like what Tish Warren talks about, with liturgy, the ordinary, that kind of like God is Julie Canlis, same thing. Like God is in this. Mike Horton wrote a book on ordinary years ago. Like it's that kind of ordinary theology somewhere where you find yourself every day, which happens to be the kitchen. So, and finding that space too can become holy ground. And so that's where that idea, the among the pots and pans kind of comes from. But then you start going, okay, how do you architect? What story? What are you going to tell theologically? I wanted to tell the story of God, or God's telling his own story rather through the meal table. And so seeing like, God provided food in the Garden of Eden, and then sin happened when we ate something we shouldn't have eaten. And then God provides a Passover lamb, as he saves the slaves. And what do the prophets say about food? And then what do you see with Jesus around the table with people? And then what about the church? And what about, you know, the communion table? What is that saying? And what about the return of Christ and the wedding supper of the Lamb? And kind of tracing that theme of food, that arc throughout the Bible, is kind of the big arc. It kind of how I architected this thing. But then I wanted to not just give like a biblical theology of food. I wanted to bring a lot of practical and very pastoral and applicable ways in which we can go about experiencing God in our actual real lives, and not just think about God in our heads, but actually genuinely strive to walk with him in our ordinary lives. You know what I'm saying? So I would take moments throughout the book and kind of drill down on things that I found to be very impactful for me over the course of my life. And so, like, I'm very much so committed to the idea of being a faithfully present man in this world. As a follower of Jesus, I think my responsibility is to respond to God and the gospel. And I respond by living a life that is faithfully present to God, to myself, to other people around me, that I actually show up. And that is what I'm trying to like say with like the dinner bell of my life, is like saying to other people is like, hey, show up, put down your phone. You don't have to throw it in the sea and forget technology entirely, but like, don't miss it. Like, let's show up and experience God and each other together now. And so that's some of how I've decided to try to bring these like practical pieces of Christian discipleship into a cookbook.
Well, let's pull a little bit more on the thread of presence. You had talked about how as you began to get into the kitchen more, you started to really encounter God's presence in the kitchen in a way that sounds like it really surprised you. As you dove into the project, as you were intentional building community around the table, so to speak, in your home,
Mhm.
how did that presence expand, not for just what you were experiencing, but how did that impact the people that you were bringing in to share this food with you? How did you see God's presence impact in a wider way?
Yeah. Yeah, because like I tend to pick meals that end up taking time. Like I'm also down with like, hey, yeah, let's do it. It's a weeknight. Let's put something together in 20-30 minutes, no problem. But like I do I like to cook with my friends, not just for my friends. Like there's a difference, and there's a difference between like entertainment and hospitality. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm here to entertain you, that means, okay, you show up at my house and I'm going to break out everything I can and wow you. And then you walk away and you go, dude, Alex can really throw down in the kitchen. I had a great time. I'm a big fan of Alex. That's entertainment. Whereas hospitality, in my understanding, is that it provides a space of warmth and welcome and belonging. And because you belong, that also means help me dice some onions in the kitchen and like get in here with me. Like, let's do this together and make something together. And as we do, you can't help but as you pass time and you're listening to music and you're catching up with your friends in the kitchen, the relationships inevitably grow and the conversations evolve from soccer practice to, oh my gosh, my father is super sick right now. Yeah, I mean, people are going to talk and they're going to share their lives. And so relationships tend to grow in these like very common and ordinary spaces rather than like the more, I don't know, sterilized spaces. You know, like people don't go to art galleries to grow relationships. You go to, like the kitchen's good for that. And so that's kind of how I've seen relationships really develop. And I've had far more meaningful, oftentimes I have more meaningful conversations in the kitchen or hanging around in the backyard, by the grill. I'll end up having more meaningful conversations in those kinds of spaces than, say, oftentimes even on a Sunday morning at church.
Well, what I love about this is I feel like you're challenging us to actually bring people into our homes and have real community, have real conversations with people. I think just with our mediated devices, we are probably one of the loneliest generations, if you will, and generations broadly across multiple generations. But you can go to church and not talk to anybody. You can, park in your garage and never talk to your neighbors. You can go through your whole week and maybe talk to your wife and your kids a little bit, but really avoid any real meaningful life impacting contact with anybody. And I mean, just with how lonely people are, the idea of actually bringing people into your home, you'll floor your neighbors or even your friends if you start inviting them over to cook for them.
But
I,
that's like the point. Like, again, like our lonely, anxious, distracted generation and cells, like we're more addicted to pain pills than ever. We're like, we can't sleep. We're angry. We're frustrated. We cancel everybody. We stare at these little screens, get agitated all day, basically. It's like, well, why don't you just put it down for a minute and just go, how are you doing? Is this how you want to be? Not like, and everybody will answer, well, no. All right. Well, how do you want to be? Well, I want to be a loving person. I want to be a hospitable person. I want to be a generous person or a gracious person, whatever. Great. Then have somebody over. Like, put somebody else kind of in your space, in your life. And again, like when it comes to hospitality, it's not about having like the biggest, coolest house. I don't like, and it's not about like being able to put on some Michelin star meal every night. That's also not the point. Again, that's like entertainment. And it's hospitality is providing again a space and time where someone can feel like they really are known, loved, and belong right there. And it's like when you create space for them, you're actually, it's backwards, but you end up creating some space for yourself too, to just be, you know?
yeah, well, and I love that space to just be because that's one of the things that's most missing for most of us in our day to day. Like we're so busy and running this way and that way, and just the
Mhm.
space to just be is almost
Mhm.
non-existent, let alone felt seen, felt heard, all the things. And I love that yes, you're bringing all those things for others if you're hosting them and doing what you're describing, but also you're actually getting some of that back. And maybe that's not your intention necessarily, but that's just it goes both ways when you're hanging out,
Totally
talking,
does.
and catching up.
Yeah, it totally does. And like, it's not just about you coming over and I fill your plate. Like you fill my cup too. Like we're here to be together in this. And yeah, so I'm finding like I'm just as much on the receiving end of being blessed by having people in my home as the people who come into my home feel blessed. Like that's how ends up working.
Well, and this is a bit of a left turn for a moment, but how have you seen it impact your kids in the sense that when we bring people into our home, we're going to have unique conversations around the table that our kids would just never ever get exposed to anywhere else in life, not even at church or whatever.
Yeah.
So, like, what has I guess expanding the community in your home, what has that brought to your kids and their experience?
That's a great question. Our kids are just started ninth grade and seventh grade, and over the years, it's shown them that the church is far bigger than your Sunday morning experience or Wednesday night, whatever, like, or even a small group. But they see that, like, yeah, there's all kinds of people and walks of life and conversations going on around mom and dad's dinner table. And for us as parents, we really value that. Like Jana and I, we definitely protect our kids and think wisely about what we're talking about in front of our kids, of course. And at the same time, we also recognize that our kids are growing up in Seattle, Washington. They see and hear everything that like still makes me blush, and it's like, it is what it is. And so what it's done for our kids is that it's helped our kids kind of grow and mature in ways by seeing another mom and a dad sitting around the table and we're talking about something serious, whether it would be something political or theological or whatever. They can see us engaging other people. And I think that gives them a bit of maturity and a bit of an edge as far as to be able to welcome people into your home who don't look like you, think like you necessarily, or talk like you, or believe like you, and yet still enjoy being together. Because friendship isn't based solely on we think the same. Like that's not friendship. And so it's helping our kids, I think, develop in some of those kinds of ways to maybe be a little more inclusive and a little more welcoming in a world that's so hell bent on canceling each other. You know what I mean?
Well, we've talked a lot about experience and impact. Let's talk now for a bit just about recipes. Like, how did you decide, like, what meals and things you wanted to cover, breakfast, lunch, dinner, types of recipes? Did you test these out and decide this
Yeah.
fits in the book, this doesn't? Like, how did you bring that side of the book together?
Yeah, there's some stuff in there that's just classic stuff, and none of it's unique or new to me at all. Like the the steak sandwich, the steak poivre sandwich, like that's a peppercorn steak that's 500 years old. Bucatini amatriciana is 1,000-year-old Roman pasta dish. Like there's some things in there that have been around since the beginning of time. Um, and then there's other things where it's like, oh, we just made this up. Like this seaweed, rice, egg, chili crunch wrap for breakfast. Like that was we just winging something one morning watching soccer with my friends. Like so we basically we just threw meals and things we like to make together and share with others. Like these are things that like we have all of our friends have had all this stuff, and so it's more like these are, your top 50 greatest hits or whatever, where it's just like, yeah, this is something I could just put in front of any of my friends and nothing's too far off the beaten path where people are like, I don't know, that's weird. Except for like maybe some people are not into like octopus. It's like, all right, well, skip the octopus tacos if that's not for you. But like, um, so yeah, we just kind of pick the things we like to make. And that's why there's a ton of pizza and a ton of tacos and a ton of pasta. Like, you know, so yeah, we just kind of pick the stuff we like.
And in terms of let's get into some of the teaching too. There was some surprising things as I was paging through the book. Like I wouldn't have expected you to tackle this. But you have kind of like, I don't know if I want to call them devotional sections, but you've got a few pages of teaching
Mhm.
for somebody to read as they're working their way through the book. Just you talk about both men in the kitchen and kids in the kitchen. On the one hand, I love that you're challenging us guys to get in the kitchen and cook. I
Totally.
think that's a good thing. Kids sometimes feel helpful in the kitchen, or they're frustrating and can because you have to slow
Mhm.
down usually. But if you're inviting friends who maybe don't necessarily cook to help you too, you're gonna have to slow down for them as well. So yeah, men in the kitchen, kids in the kitchen. Like, what are some of the ways you're trying to encourage there?
One thing with men in the kitchen, there's actually been kind of a resurgence, and there's some work now published online about men going into the kitchen. And the reason being is because there's something that men are getting that's kind of primally wired into men about literally putting food on the table. And so it's not just you go to your desk job, maybe you go to the grocery, maybe your wife goes to the grocery, maybe you're involved in the kitchen, maybe you're not, maybe mom makes everything. Um, and you still kind of put food on the table because you went to your job or whatever. But that kind of paradigm or that idea is kind of fading in some ways, where men are going, I actually get something out of making something with my hands for my wife, my children, my friends, and putting something on the table. That there's something primally wired within us to go, this is kind of also part of my responsibility, and I don't have to punt to my spouse, and I don't have to just rely on Uber Eats. I can actually do this myself. And men are finding like some real satisfaction in it. So that's one. To the kids in the kitchen thing, you know, you're right. They do slow you down unless you're smart and you pick a recipe that like isn't gonna like break them or you, or you're not gonna kill each other. But like, if you're like, I got a kid and I that like won't last 5 minutes in the kitchen with me, great. Then you can start with take and bake cookies. You know what I mean? Like the Toll House cookies. Like they're probably not gonna stand there and make some giant lasagna with you for 4 hours, but you can start there. Or like Tove, like we put her favorite dessert, panna cotta, in there, and that's a easy dessert to make that doesn't take very long. And so there's something about being able to pass on a skill to your kids. So for dads, a lot of dads can teach their children like how to swing a hammer or turn a wrench or something like that. For me, because like I said earlier, I'm useless with those things. My kids aren't going to get a whole lot of that. But what I can show them is like how to care for their kitchen tools, how to prepare a meal, how to go to the grocery, how to budget for the X, Y, and Z. Like I can pass on these skills. So I can't do everything, but I can do this. And so yeah, that's kind of the approach there. And just to be able to spend a little time in a space like that uh, doesn't cost you anything, and you can get, if it's just 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or maybe an hour together in the kitchen, that's you're getting infinitely more than a meal out of that. Like you're investing in your kid. So yeah.
Well, and I mean that really ties back what you said about men in the kitchen, especially kind of the you work with words. This is a way to work with your hands. I think for so many of us now, we're knowledge workers in one way or another. And, there's money that gets electronically transferred into our bank, but like we don't even get a bag of money to take home. So
Right.
I love that this is actually like you're literally putting food on the table for your friends, your wife, your kids, all the things like that. That is a real kind of primal, ingrained, the way God designed us kind of circumstance. And so to actually step back into like literally putting food on the table, maybe you didn't kill it, but you
Yeah.
cooked it, and it taps into something that we've really lost. The other thing I like too is I think of especially like we're both Gen X. I think of the generations that have come after us, most people, and especially women too, weren't like trained to be homemakers. Like their both parents worked. Like a lot of times, they were just eating out too growing up, and so we're not living kind of that 50s lifestyle where women are cooking all the time or in the
Right.
kitchen all the time. And so I love that you're encouraging us guys to get into the kitchen and do more and literally put that food on the table. That's kind of
Mhm.
fun. Let's jump into just some of the teaching too, just because I want to kind of have you give people a flavor of what some of that looks like. One of the teaching sections talks about racial reconciliation around the table. Maybe not a topic you thought you were going to discover in a cookbook. Talk to us a little bit about what you were going after there.
Yeah. Well, post 2020 and everything, that has become an extremely important conversation topic around every dinner table in the United States and all over the globe. And for me, um, one thing that I've always been afraid to cook Asian food. I'll just say that. Like, I've always been overwhelmingly intimidated. If we're gonna have sushi, we're going out for sushi. I'm not making sushi at home, and I'm still there with sushi. But like when it comes to like Asian food, I've always been intimidated. There's like 5,000 kinds of soy sauce. I can't read anything on the label at the Asian market. Like, I don't know how to do any of this, but my Japanese friends do, and my Korean friends do, and my Chinese friends do. And it's like, oh, well, so I started going to ethnic grocery stores with my friends and letting them show me around their grocery store and the kitchen and learning from them. How did your grandma make dumplings? And how did this work? Like, how do you do this? And so in that space, it also can open up conversation to then talk about our differences and our uniqueness and the way in which we're made. Tell me about your grandparents. Where did they come from and what did they grow up like? And hearing firsthand rather than just scrolling some Twitter article or X or whatever it's called, like reading some article, you're actually hearing real stories up close. And when you hear real stories from real people in your real kitchen as you're really dicing onions, suddenly the guard is down and you're no longer trying to filter everything, but you're literally just listening to your friend go, yeah, that's what my grandma told me that happened to her or something that she saw. And suddenly you're in another world. And that is a very good. And so it's a way to learn, it's a way to bridge build. Uh, and of course, again, you end up eating around the table. And those people end up being your friends.
Well, I love that you're not just bringing people into your world, so to speak, or to your house. You're actually intentionally trying to get into their world, which is fantastic. And again, that kind of filling the cup up, that's going both ways
Yeah.
in all of
Yeah.
those
And as a pastor, for me, like part of my responsibility is to speak to some of these things in our culture, in our society. They're questions that come up. And yet I can't talk just as a white guy that sat at my desk in my pastoral library and then come and then give this like theological data like a cold scientist. But rather, these kinds of conversations in my kitchen make it to where when I talk, it can come out of my soul a bit more. And then I started going, well, anybody can do this. So that's why you'll find something like that because like anybody can read a cookbook and do that.
Well, and I always like in so many of these circumstances, one, you can't really give away what you don't have,
Yeah.
and so I feel like what you just described, you're able to operate from a real place of authenticity and integrity, speaking to some of these things. So you're like,
Yeah.
this is how I do my life, and that, and you can give that away to others and encourage them in that direction. So I love the intentionality. I think probably in terms of one more teaching theme, you have a teaching section on humility in food. What'd you
Yeah.
tackle there?
Yeah. Well, the fact is that if you're going to get into cooking, you're going to be humiliated. Yes. Oh, you will cut yourself. You will burn yourself. You'll screw something up. The time I was most humbled, I think, in the kitchen was one night I made pad thai, and it was so good. It was so good I could hardly sleep. And I thought about it all day the next day. And I thought, I'm going to go for it again and make pad thai again tonight. And everybody's like, yay, great. Dad's going to make pad thai again. Only I took the tamarind paste and went, oh, if 1 tablespoon of tamarind paste was amazing, 2 tablespoons will be even better. And it ruined everything. And I was so angry. Oh, I ruined this perfect thing. And pizza will humble you. Rolling out pizza dough and learning how to shoot it into the pizza oven just right. All these things. There's something about humility and food. Just in the prep work, you'll be humbled. You're learning a task. You're learning a craft, a skill. Um, but also, um, when it comes to food and humility, like because we live in such a foodie culture, we can become so entitled and so expectant and so insistent that every single thing we eat must look and taste and be this incredible experience. When in reality, like, have some humility. A tomato sandwich is fine, like, and it can still be really, really great. But there's something in our world that like worships food to a degree that's not healthy, I don't think. I think having a proper perspective of it, going kind of what does Paul say? Like, whatever you eat or drink, do it to the glory of God. Like it's not to the glory of the food. It's to the glory of God, which involves, yeah, make something great and enjoy the people around the table if you happen to be with other people. But yeah, so that's some of the humility in food.
In terms of, and this is a little weird maybe to ask about a cookbook, but hey, we've got teaching in there, so it still works. Like reader takeaway, or somebody spends time, they're cooking, they're stepping into some of the things you're talking about in the book. Like, how do you hope this book impacts the person, or maybe impacts their kind of their little community as they're walking out some of the things you talk about in the book?
Yeah, I think what I want to invite people into is what I was saying earlier of living a present life, of inviting people into your space and not waiting until like you don't have to wait until later, until you have the 5,000 square foot house and this 1,000 square foot kitchen and everything is just amazing. And now you don't have to wait to experience real life with God or others. You can have it now. Like I talked about in the introduction, like you don't need a PhD in New Testament theology in order to savor the bread that comes down from heaven. And you also don't need a degree in culinary arts to enjoy fresh baked bread out of your own oven. Like you don't, you have what you need because you have your life and you have those around you. And those people around you are not the supporting actors to the drama of your life. They are your life. So again, so what I'm trying to invite people into is into their own story with God, like now.
And then for you, obviously, this was a very unique and a special project, but also extremely personal given the level of partnership with your wife and everything. Um,
Mhm.
is there anything unique you discovered about yourself or learned about yourself in the process? Because this must just have been a trip and a half to pull this all together.
It was a lot of work. Um, I learned that my wife is even more patient than I would have ever dreamed. We didn't kill each other in the kitchen after shooting and cooking for 2 years. Um, you know, and we enjoyed that. But like, is there anything I learned about myself? Um, I think I learned that I'm far more disciplined than I would have given myself credit for. Like, I mean, I committed to this thing and saw it all the way through and like latched onto it like a bulldog and just there were moments where I was very tired. Like I, I didn't like quit my full-time job as a pastor. Like I would then do this like on Friday, Saturday, and like write and cook and all that. And so I'm kind of shocked. I also am super relieved that the book is done and out there because it was like the hardest thing I think I've ever had to work on, like for real. Like it was a lift. but I'm really, really glad we did it. And because it's just so aesthetic, it's a beautiful book, you know. Don Clark, one of my best friends in the whole world, he did the cover design. It's debossed. And then all the illustrations throughout the book are just beautiful. So his work is called Invisible Creature. And he's worked with the greatest companies in the world. And he volunteered and just said, dude, let me work on this project with you. Jana's shooting, let me do the cover. So we went to the guys at Harvest House and said, hey, Don wants to do this. And they're like, okay, yes. And so he's amazing. And so this thing just looks aesthetically beautiful. And so yeah, I'm relieved that I'm done with the writing and cooking, and now everybody can enjoy it for what it's intended to be.
And if you contrast this with your journeys with your other nonfiction, more
Yeah.
regular trade books, like is 2 years a longer journey than some of your other books? Like, because usually I expect somebody's going to take maybe a year, year and a half to write, but two, that's a bit more than normal, at least in my experience.
Two is a bit more than normal, and even then it was a lift because I mean there's 50 recipes, and you're shooting, you're cooking, and you're writing a book, and you're being meticulous about every measurement, which also that I cook by eye and color and things like that. Like I'm just going, and then when Harvest House is like, well, how much salt goes in the eggs, Alex? Like, I don't know. Like, well, you're going to need to tell us if this is a cookbook, Alex. Like, oh yeah. So uh, that's why it took 2 years because it is a ton of work that goes into a cookbook, and I had no idea until I made one.
And Alex, for all of us who want to find out more about this book, your other work, all the things, where do we
Yeah.
connect with you on the web?
Paearly.com. So that's my website. And I'm there. I'm on Instagram at Alex Early or Alex Early Food. Those are two spots. Facebook, all the usual places.
Yes, he shows up in all the usual places. We'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the description of the show notes to Alex's website, as well as places where you can pick up your very own copy of his brand new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Alex Early. Once again, our book today was Among the Pots and Pans. Connect with God, love your neighbor, and nourish your community through the art of cooking. And Alex, thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.